Hi guys, I'm Nicole Scott and this is Don Dahlmann. And for the past couple of months we've been deep diving on hydrogen and we've learned quite a lot. So today we're going to take you on a little bit of an education series around hydrogen, and we're going to start with battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles, because I've been driving a Nexo for the past few months, and every time I post about it, one of the first things that people say is, but is it as efficient as a battery car? And then I always wonder why they start like this.
Yeah, I think the problem with this, the Nexo is a great car. I've been driven it too for a long distance especially, so it's wonderful to use it and see how simple it is to use it. And I think a lot of people underestimate that hydrogen that you use for the fuel cell car, for the Nexo, is not only for mobility. It's more than mobility. It's a whole ecosystem which is behind the hydrogen, or so-called hydrogen revolution. But people tend to just pin it down to, like, is it efficient or more efficient or less efficient than a battery electric car? And I think this is the wrong question.
I also think that if you look at the bigger picture of how we've had cars or trucks or whatever in the past, we've had different fuel sources, right? We've had diesel and we've had normal petrol. And I think that what people can be short-sighted about is that as we transition to renewable energies, we're going to need different kinds of renewables. And green hydrogen is one of those solutions.
Yeah, we always had like two technologies. Yes, internal combustion engine, but a diesel and a gasoline engine are like two different animals. It's completely different. So we always had like two rivaling technologies. And I think just going for battery electric cars and not looking for other options is a mistake, because we need to be open for new technologies, and we need to see how new technologies are developing in the future. And hydrogen, as I said again, it's about the ecosystem. It's not about like putting it into your car and drive to Spain or to somewhere. It's more than this.
But I also think that the battery electric car and the fuel cell car actually aren't that different. Their energy source is different, but their kind of components are not that different.
Yeah, you have electric engines that are like powering your wheels. You have a battery also in a fuel cell car, because you need it as a buffer to like store energy when you're standing in a congestion or waiting on a traffic light. You need some energy for your climate controls or radio or whatever. So you have that too. But then in a hydrogen car, you have the fuel cell, which is different from the battery electric car. You only have like the big battery that you have in the floor of your car mostly. But there you have a fuel cell, which is a bit more complicated. It's actually an easy chemical process, but it's a bit of a complicated thing to like build into a car still yet, because again, hydrogen is not as technology-wise, is maybe behind 10 to 15 years compared to solar. So solar is a step ahead or two steps ahead of hydrogen at the moment, but this is going to change.
Because you're actually talking about as a energy storage solution.
Yes.
And I think that this is something that people kind of forget, is that when you look at battery, this is one way to store energy. When you look at hydrogen, this is another way to store energy, right? And it's in a transportable way.
Yeah.
Right? And whereas in a battery, you load the battery and then the energy stays there. It doesn't,
exactly,
you're not able to transport it around.
Exactly, you can transport hydrogen. It's not complicated, but you have to make some efforts for it, of course. But we made a lot of efforts to transport gasoline. We built huge ships that can transport crude oil to refineries, like then work with it. And we built trucks that transport it. So I think they have a whole infrastructure around it. It's not easy to transport oil. Or you can say it's easy to transport oil, and the same goes with hydrogen. It's easy to transport hydrogen because you can transport it in any form you want.
So now these two complementary technologies will move forward in an ecosystem together, because they have different strengths that actually, in a future of mobility, complement each other. And I think that the more progressive manufacturers are looking at their battery electric line and their fuel cell line as complementary lines that will fill different needs.
Exactly. This is what you have. I think what you have to do as a manufacturer, like you have to look to all possibilities that make in the future. I know it's hard for manufacturers because they now have to change to electric cars, and now something else comes around the corner. I mean, but hydrogen isn't new. Manufacturers are playing around with this in 30, 40 years, so they know that it's there. And I think it's important for manufacturers to be that open about technologies and to develop different solutions for different scenarios, because you and me, we may only use a car in the city most of the time, but there are a lot of people who use it differently. And we tend to look to Europe only, we're small countries, but if you look to your country, Canada or the States or Russia, or other huge countries also in Africa, we're talking about long distances that you have to cover, and then hydrogen can be very important.
There is two types of powertrain in the future, and we think these two powertrains will coexist anyway, and that's why Hyundai is investing in battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles all together. So as a company, when we compete in the future mobility industry, we have two cards. So we have battery and we have fuel cell. I think Hyundai is in good position in that way.
There's a shift in focus of the society, I think, that's switching towards a more greener mindset. There's a much higher awareness now of the ecological problems we have. So I think it's just the right time now for a new emission-free technology. And then second of all, obviously the technology itself gets better as well, right? So it's getting better, it's getting more efficient, it's getting cheaper by that. So we're getting out of this demo mode, and we will see more sustainable, ecologically and economically sustainable, viable business cases. And that would obviously help.
It is not only for climate change that we need to have zero-emission cars. It's also for air quality. It's also for health. We have today 7 million people dying every year of air pollution because of the particles that are emitted by internal combustion engines.
And now when most people hear the word electromobility, they think of electric cars, specifically battery electric vehicles. They're not wrong, but BEVs will play an important role in our future mobility. They're completely emission-free, suitable for most people's daily mobility needs in urban areas. But for frequent trips with long ranges, there's a better solution: fuel cell electric vehicles.
So that was quite interesting, because you learn hydrogen is especially interesting for long-haul transport. As I said, like in your country, in Canada, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think that there is definitely a way that these two different technologies fit different use cases. But like, having said this, that battery electric vehicles work better for the city, right? Because they have higher efficiency. But when you start to look at long-haul transportation, the fueling times are much lower. So the battery doesn't need to be charged, and it's like more light, because the battery for a truck or a ship is very heavy.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes sense to have a lighter fuel source for some of these different.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Hydrogen can store more energy per kilo, so it makes more sense to especially for trucks and ships, trains, trams, and whatever you want to use. It makes more sense to use hydrogen, but also like for long distance, because the refill just takes. Well, I mean, we tried it with an Nexo. The Nexo has a range of 600 kilometers or something, so it's like 5-minute refill, and then you're good, and you leave the station. It's basically filling up your tank like you used to do it. So it helps you to do long distance in a better and even, I think, more convenient way. And it also, I think, you don't have to think about, when you talk about efficiency, it's also about the efficiency of in terms of climate and economical reasons, because the hydrogen can be produced. If you produce green hydrogen, it's easy to produce that. You don't need anything else to store it somewhere. Batteries have to be manufactured, so there is also a CO2 part in that too, in the manufacturing process, which you don't have with hydrogen.
So the efficiency debate, I think, doesn't always take the context of the larger environmental impact for why we're switching to renewables.
Yes.
I think that this is something that I always find it so strange whenever I discuss hydrogen or the Nexo online, everyone automatically says, but efficiency. And
Yes.
they're not wrong, right? And this is the interesting part of the debate, I think, is that when you look at the efficiency of the engine, when's the last time that we discussed that for petrol?
Exactly, and hydrogen is even more efficient than petrol. I mean, petrol engines are, in terms of efficiency, they're like stupidly worse. It's like 30% of the energy. Well, if you look at well-to-wheel, only 30% of the energy that you filled into your tank, the gas, is going to the wheel. The rest is just heat, burn, etc. Battery electric cars are around 70%, 75% efficient. Hydrogen, 35 to 40% around. It's not a lot, but even 10% more efficiency can be a lot, especially if you use like green produced hydrogen. And then also again, it's a whole ecosystem around hydrogen. It's not about mobility, because we will need hydrogen as an energy storage solution in the future anyway, so it's there. So, and if it's there, if you produced it already for other purposes, you can also use it for mobility if you want to. I'm not saying that every car will be a hydrogen car. I don't think so, because you will have a lot of use cases for battery electric cars, but they will be hydrogen cars, and I can't not understand why manufacturers are not pushing more for them.
And I also can't understand why everyone sees it as an either or, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It either has to be battery or it's hydrogen.
Yeah.
Like that these two camps are so adversarial when, in all honesty, we need to be looking at green solutions in all sectors of mobility, in all sectors of energy production. That this way of thinking that we're going to put two green technologies against each other and one will have to win as like an all-out war. I mean, we have so many kinds of CO2 intense forms of energy that it doesn't even make sense to me that we would only have one form of green energy as we move forward.
I think efficiency has more than one aspect. People always talk about drivetrain efficiency, but efficiency has more aspects. For instance, in heavy-duty transport, it's also the range payload trade-off. But I'll let Mark comment on this. I would like to make a different point. Efficiency is perhaps not what really is the most important parameter. What's important, why are we doing all this? We're doing all this just to decarbonize the mobility, for instance. And so what counts really is the carbon balance. And now what also Bertrand has a little bit touched upon before, the more we build up renewables deliver the electricity. Nature dictates when the electricity comes. And the more we build up the renewables, the more we're going to create a problem that we have a supply-demand mismatch. And especially we're going to have more and more electricity for which we don't have any use at this particular time when it's being produced. So what you actually need is a means just to absorb and to harness all this electricity and convert it into something useful instead of just releasing it to nature or whatever. And so hydrogen in that sense is the perfect means because you can absorb actually unlimited quantities of such electricity and bring it into other sectors. It's not only mobility, but as Bertrand has also explained, also industry needs a lot of hydrogen, and hydrogen is sometimes just a better solution than electricity.
Totally agree with what Stefan just said. I mean, just purely looking at the efficiency is probably the wrong aspect. But if you look at the efficiency from a transportation perspective again, it's about bringing goods from A to B, and battery technology on heavy-duty trucking side at least. And don't get me wrong, battery technology has its place in small applications probably, but on the heavy-duty trucking side, fuel cell makes much more sense because it's about moving goods from A to B. And if you then take into consideration how much payload is left with much heavier battery technology, what is the range, and then compare that even from a purely efficiency calculation, it's a quite easy calculation. Like I said, fuel cell makes much more sense.
So I think from an ecosystem perspective, we see how it makes sense for large-scale energy producers like Alpiq, who produces hydrogen and other forms of electricity for Switzerland, works in a large-scale business model, right? And how it makes sense, right, for them in their energy production to move forward. But this just goes to the point that we need to transition everything over, and hydrogen cars or fuel cell cars and battery cars will both have a place.
Exactly. I mean, there you can see how difficult it is for us to stop thinking about the way we used to produce energy, because the energy we use today is already stored. It's oil, so if you burn it, it releases energy, and you can use it in different forms. The energy we use in the future has to be cached in solar, in wind, in other stuff. And what you're going to do? I mean, how do you store wind and how do you store solar? And so you use batteries, of course, but batteries will not be the solution for everything. And again, then we come to the mobility situation. It's the same. So why not having the openness for more technology? Because we need it in different sectors, like trucks and trains and planes and maybe even in ships and other things. So I think this is an important thing that we have. If we think about hydrogen, we have to think about the whole thing.
And so up next, we actually have a hydrogen. It's not just for cars, because it's true. It's for all different sectors. And for planes especially, it makes perfect sense for them to go in a hydrogen direction because the fuel is light, right? And batteries are too heavy for planes.
Exactly.
Right? So there are other sectors where hydrogen is the perfect match, and we're going to discuss that up next.